What if I told you that in May 1942, two Czech paratroopers ambushed and mortally wounded Reinhard Heydrich, the architect of the Holocaust, head of the Reich Security Main Office, and the man Hitler called the man with the iron heart, and that, in retaliation, the Nazis murdered approximately 5,000 Czech civilians, erased two entire villages from existence, and hunted the assassins to a church where they fought to the death? The operation was codenamed Anthropoid. The assassins were Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, Czech and Slovak soldiers trained in Britain who parachuted into occupied Czechoslovakia with one mission: kill Reinhard Heydrich. On May 27, 1942, they ambushed Heydrich's open-top Mercedes on a Prague street. A submachine gun jammed. A bomb was thrown. Heydrich was wounded. 8 days later, he died from his injuries: sepsis from bomb fragments and upholstery horsehair that had penetrated his body. Hitler was enraged. The SS launched a massive manhunt. When they couldn't immediately find the assassins, they decided to make Czechoslovakia pay. The village of Lidice was accused, falsely, of harboring the assassins. On June 10, 1942, SS forces surrounded Lidice, separated the population by gender, shot all 173 men and teenage boys, deported all women to Ravensbrück concentration camp, and sent all children to be Germanized or killed. Then they burned the village, demolished the buildings, and attempted to erase it from maps. The assassins held out for 3 weeks before being cornered in a Prague church. They fought SS forces for hours before committing suicide rather than be captured alive. This is the story of Operation Anthropoid, the only successful assassination of a top Nazi official during the war, and the devastating price Czechoslovakia paid for it. To understand Operation Anthropoid, you need to understand both Reinhard Heydrich's role in the Nazi regime and the situation in occupied Czechoslovakia. Reinhard Heydrich, the architect. Reinhard Heydrich was one of the most powerful and dangerous men in Nazi Germany. Chief of the Reich Security Main Office, RSHA. This organization controlled the Gestapo, SD, intelligence service, and criminal police, essentially the entire Nazi security apparatus. Architect of the Holocaust, Heydrich chaired the Wannsee Conference, January 1942, where the final solution was formalized. Head of Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads that murdered over 1 million Jews, Roma, and others in occupied Eastern Europe. Acting Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, Hitler appointed Heydrich to govern occupied Czechoslovakia. In September 1941, Heydrich was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without conscience. Hitler reportedly called him the man with the iron heart. Himmler, his immediate superior, feared him. Other Nazi leaders considered him the most dangerous man in the Reich. At age 38, Heydrich was being groomed for even higher positions, potentially Himmler's successor or even as a rival to Hitler himself. The Czech Protectorate Czechoslovakia had been occupied by Germany in March 1939, 6 months before the war began. The country was divided. Bohemia and Moravia became the Protectorate, directly controlled by Germany. Slovakia became a puppet state. The Sudetenland was annexed directly into Germany. Czech resistance was initially strong, but was largely crushed by German repression in 1939-40. By 1941, the resistance was weakened, and many Czechs were cooperating with German occupation, not out of Nazi sympathy, but out of pragmatism and fear. The British concern. The Czech government in exile in London, led by President Edvard Beneš, faced a political problem. The Munich Agreement, 1938, had ceded Czech territory to Germany with British and French approval. Czech collaboration with German occupation was making the exile government appear irrelevant. There was international discussion about post-war borders. Would Czechoslovakia be restored, or would it remain dismembered? Beneš believed that a dramatic act of resistance would demonstrate Czech refusal to accept German occupation, strengthen the exile government's legitimacy, potentially provoke German reprisals that would turn Czech public opinion against collaboration. The decision to assassinate Heydrich was partly military, removing a key Nazi leader, and partly political, proving Czech resistance existed. Operation Anthropoid was planned and organized by British Special Operations Executive, SOE, in cooperation with Czech military intelligence. The assassins. 2 men were selected for the mission. Jozef Gabčík, age 30, a Slovak soldier who had escaped to Poland when Germany occupied Czechoslovakia, then to France, then to Britain after France fell. Trained in special operations, known for his calm demeanor and precision. Jan Kubiš, age 28, a Czech soldier with similar escape path, trained alongside Gabčík, known for his resourcefulness and determination. Both men volunteered for the mission, knowing it was likely one way. They received intensive training in assassination techniques, weapons, explosives, silent killing, and survival in occupied territory. The training and equipment. The assassins trained in Britain for months. Parachute training, urban ambush tactics, use of specialized weapons, Sten submachine gun, modified anti-tank mines adapted as grenades, survival and evasion in occupied territory, cover identities and documentation they were equipped with, British-made Sten guns, chosen for being concealable, modified anti-tank mines fashioned into throwable bombs, Colt pistols, Czech currency, documents, and civilian clothes, suicide pills, cyanide capsules to be used if capture was imminent. The insertion. On December 28, 1941, Gabčík and Kubiš parachuted into occupied Czechoslovakia, along with several other Czech agents on different missions. The drop was chaotic. They landed miles from their intended drop zone in harsh winter conditions. But they made contact with the Czech resistance network in Prague and began preparing for the assassination. For 5 months, they lived underground in Prague, studying Heydrich's movements and planning the attack. May 27, 1942. The assassination attempt occurred at a hairpin turn on a Prague street where Heydrich's car would slow down. The site. The ambush location was at the Holešovice district in Prague, at a tram stop where Kirchmeierstrasse, now named after Heydrich's assassins, makes a sharp turn. Heydrich's route to Prague Castle passed through this intersection every morning. The site was chosen because Heydrich's Mercedes would slow to navigate the turn. Tram stops provided cover for waiting. Escape routes existed in multiple directions. The location allowed clear fields of fire. The team. The actual assassination attempt involved 3 men. Jozef Gabčík with the Sten gun, positioned at the turn. Jan Kubiš with the bomb, positioned nearby. Jozef Valčík, another Czech agent, positioned as lookout further up the street with a mirror to signal when Heydrich's car approached the attack. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Valčík signaled that Heydrich's car was approaching. Gabčík stepped into the street, raised his Sten gun, and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. Heydrich's driver, SS Oberscharführer Klein, saw Gabčík with the weapon and tried to swerve. But instead of driving away at speed, Klein stopped the car and drew his pistol, following Heydrich's standing orders to confront attackers rather than flee. This decision was fatal. While Klein and Heydrich were drawing weapons and the car was stopped, Jan Kubiš threw his bomb. The bomb landed against the right rear wheel of the Mercedes and exploded. The blast tore a hole in the car's rear, shredding the interior and sending shrapnel, upholstery fragments, and metal through Heydrich's back and side. Heydrich stumbled from the car, pursued Kubiš briefly while drawing his pistol, then collapsed from his injuries. Klein chased Kubiš on foot but lost him. Gabčík fled in a different direction, escaping on a bicycle that had been positioned nearby. Heydrich was taken to a Prague hospital. His injuries were severe but initially seemed survivable. Deep lacerations and puncture wounds, including fragments of the car's upholstery, and the bomb casing lodged in his spleen and diaphragm. The medical aftermath. Heydrich received medical treatment from Prague's best surgeons, including a German specialist flown in from Berlin. The surgeons operated, removing the spleen and extracting some fragments. But the wounds became infected. Sepsis set in. Heydrich's condition deteriorated over the following week. On June 4, 1942, 8 days after the attack, Reinhard Heydrich died from septic shock and complications from his wounds. Hitler was personally informed. He was reportedly furious that Heydrich, a man he'd relied on and groomed for higher command, had been killed by what he called Czech terrorists. Even before Heydrich died, the Nazi reprisal machine had started. After his death, it accelerated into systematic terror. The immediate response: Hitler declared a state of emergency in the Protectorate. SS Obergruppenführer Kurt Daluege was appointed to replace Heydrich and implement reprisals. The orders were explicit: make Czechoslovakia pay. Initial measures included arrest of thousands of Czech civilians in Prague and surrounding areas, summary executions of anyone remotely suspected of involvement or knowledge, martial law and curfews, rewards offered for information about the assassins, millions of Reichsmarks. In the first days after the assassination, approximately 1,000 Czechs were executed without trial. People arrested essentially at random to demonstrate German power. The destruction of Lidis. The most infamous reprisal was the destruction of Lidis, a mining village of approximately 500 people located 20 kilometers northwest of Prague. German intelligence, likely through torture of captured resistance members, received a false lead that the Lidis area had connections to the assassins. This was incorrect. Lidis had no connection to Operation Anthropoid, but the Nazis used it as a pretext. On June 9, 1942, German security police surrounded Lidis. On June 10th, the men and boys, all males over age 16, 173 people, were separated from their families, taken to a farm on the village edge, and shot in groups throughout the day. Their bodies were buried in a mass grave. The women, all 184 women and teenage girls, were transported to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. About 60 died in the camp from overwork, disease, and brutality. Survivors weren't released until the war ended. The children, all 105 children were taken. The Nazis conducted racial examinations to determine which could be Germanized, adopted into German families after having their identities erased. 9 children were selected for Germanization. The remaining 82 children were sent to the Chomno extermination camp in Poland and gassed. The village. After the population was removed, SS units systematically burned all buildings, demolished all structures, filled in the pond, diverted the stream, and attempted to plow over the entire site. The goal was to erase Lidis from existence. Even the name was forbidden. The Ležáky Massacre. A second village, Ležáky, was destroyed on June 24, 1942, after a radio transmitter used by the Czech resistance was discovered nearby. The destruction followed a similar pattern. All men, 33 people, were shot. All women, 23 people, were taken to concentration camps. Most died. All children, 13, except for 2 selected for Germanization, were sent to extermination camps. The village was burned and demolished. The broader terror beyond Lidis and Ležáky, the Nazi reprisals included approximately 1,300 Czechs executed in formal reprisal actions, thousands more arrested and sent to concentration camps, execution of anyone suspected of helping the resistance or withholding information, further deportations of Jews from the Protectorate to death camps, using the assassination as justification. Total estimate: approximately 5,000 Czech civilians died in the reprisals following Heydrich's assassination. While the reprisals terrorized the Czech population, German security forces hunted the assassins. The investigation. The Gestapo conducted a massive investigation. Thousands of interrogations, torture of suspected resistance members, surveillance of known resistance contacts, rewards and threats to induce betrayal. The investigation was complicated by the fact that Gabčík and Kubiš had operated through a resistance cell that followed strict security protocols. Few people knew their identities or whereabouts. The betrayal. The break came through betrayal. Karl Čurda, a Czech paratrooper who had been on a different mission, turned himself into the Gestapo on June 13, 1942. Čurda had been living in hiding but panicked after seeing the Lidis massacre. He believed that providing information might stop further reprisals. He gave the Gestapo names of resistance members who had helped the paratroopers, safe houses where paratroopers had been sheltered. Eventually, the location where Gabčík and Kubiš were hiding, Čurda received his reward money. He was also despised by Czechs as a traitor. After the war, he was tried, convicted, and executed in 1947. The church siege. Based on information from Čurda's betrayal, the Gestapo learned that Gabčík, Kubiš, and 5 other Czech paratroopers were hiding in the crypt of the Church of Saints Cyril and Methodius in Prague. On June 18, 1942, approximately 700 to 800 German SS and police surrounded the church. The siege began at 4:15 a.m., Phase 1. The upper church, 3 paratroopers, Adolf Opalka, Jozef Bublik, and Jan Hruby, were in the church gallery. When Germans attempted to enter, they opened fire. The firefight lasted approximately 2 hours. All 3 paratroopers were eventually killed. 2 shot, 1 committed suicide with his last bullet rather than be captured. Phase 2, the crypt, 4 paratroopers, Gabčík, Kubiš, Jozef Valčík, and Jaroslav Schwarz, were in the crypt, a basement level accessible only through a narrow entrance. German forces attempted to storm the crypt but were driven back by gunfire. The paratroopers had positioned themselves well and had ammunition. The Germans then tried tear gas. Ventilation was poor but not enough to force surrender. Flooding the crypt, pumping in water from fire hoses. The flooding gradually raised the water level. The paratroopers tried to dig through the wall to an adjacent sewer but failed. As water rose to chest height, they recognized the situation was hopeless. Rather than be captured, all 4 committed suicide, shooting themselves with their last bullets or taking cyanide pills. By 10:30 a.m., the siege was over. All 7 paratroopers were dead. None had been captured alive. The assassination of Heydrich had immediate consequences and long-term historical significance. The immediate impact. The reprisals terrorized the Czech population. Many Czechs were angry at the assassins, not because they sympathized with Heydrich, but because the reprisals had been so devastating. The question debated in whispers: was killing 1 Nazi worth 5,000 Czech lives? The Czech government in exile in London was also divided. Some officials argued the operation had been a success. Heydrich was dead, Czech resistance had been demonstrated. Others argued the cost had been too high. The Munich Agreement nullification, one of Beneš's political goals, was achieved. Britain and other allies repudiated the Munich Agreement of 1938 and recognized Czechoslovakia's pre-war borders. The assassination demonstrated that Czechs rejected German occupation, which strengthened the exile government's claim to represent a sovereign nation. The Holocaust acceleration. Some historians argue that Heydrich's death led to acceleration of the Holocaust. The Nazis named the intensified deportation and murder operations after him. Einsatz Reinhard, Operation Reinhard, which established the extermination camps at Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. This is controversial. The Holocaust was already planned and underway before Heydrich's death. But the Nazis used his assassination as additional justification for genocidal policies. Heydrich's replacement as head of the RSHA was Ernst Kaltenbrunner, who continued Heydrich's policies but lacked his intelligence and ruthless efficiency. Some historians speculate that Heydrich's death weakened Nazi security operations because Kaltenbrunner was less capable. After the war, the memory of Operation Anthropoid and the Lidice massacre became central to Czech national identity. The rebuilding of Lidice. The village of Lidice was rebuilt after the war, and not on the original site, which remains as a memorial, but nearby. The new village was funded partly by international donations, as Lidice became a symbol of Nazi brutality. The original site contains a memorial wall with names of all victims, a museum documenting the massacre, the mass grave where the men were buried, a rose garden with 82 roses, one for each child murdered. Every year on June 10th, survivors and families gather at Lidice to commemorate the massacre. The trials. After the war, those responsible for the Lidice massacre were tried. Max Rostock, the German security official who directed the massacre, convicted and executed 1951. Several other participants, convicted of war crimes, various sentences. Czurda, the traitor who betrayed the assassins, tried and executed in 1947. The heroes Gabčík, Kubiš, and the other paratroopers were commemorated as national heroes. They are buried with honors in Prague. The church where they died is now a memorial. Streets are named after them. But the debate continues. Were they heroes whose courage inspired resistance? Or were they brave but misguided men whose action brought catastrophe on innocent people? Operation Anthropoid raises profound questions about resistance, reprisals, and the costs of fighting tyranny. The moral calculus. Was killing Heydrich worth 5,000 Czech lives? This question has no comfortable answer. Heydrich was a mass murderer responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. Removing him was morally justified. The reprisals were Nazi war crimes. The Nazis bore responsibility for murdering innocents, not the assassins. But the assassins and their commanders knew reprisals were likely. They proceeded anyway. The Czech people paid the price for an operation planned in London. This doesn't make the operation wrong, but it makes the moral accounting complex. The resistance dilemma. All resistance movements face this dilemma. Acts of resistance provoke reprisals. If you act, innocents die. If you don't act, tyranny continues uncontested. There's no clean answer. Operation Anthropoid is a case study in this terrible choice. Today in Prague, there's a plaque on the street where Heydrich was ambushed. The church where the paratroopers died is a memorial and museum. In the crypt where they made their last stand, you can still see bullet holes in the walls. In Lidice, 82 roses bloom in memory of 82 children gassed at Chomno. The village that was erased still exists as absence, a memorial to what was destroyed. Reinhard Heydrich, architect of the Holocaust, the man Hitler called the man with the iron heart, died from an ambush by 2 Czech soldiers with a jammed gun and a modified bomb. His death cost 5,000 Czech lives. The Nazis made Czechoslovakia pay in blood for one man's death. But that man was planning to murder millions. He'd already murdered hundreds of thousands. His death removed one of the Holocaust's chief architects. Jozef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš knew they wouldn't survive their mission. They went anyway. They fought to the end. And they died in a flooded church basement rather than be captured. Were they heroes? Yes. Were their deaths worth it? That's harder to answer. Was the cost too high? The families of Lidice's murdered children might say yes. The millions who would have died if Heydrich lived might say no. If you want to understand the costs of resistance, the moral complexity of fighting tyranny, and why some acts of courage bring both victory and tragedy, subscribe. Because Operation Anthropoid wasn't just an assassination. It was 7 men against the Nazi Empire, and both sides paid in blood.